Welcome back to Sidewalk, Skyline podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Rogers, and I'm very excited to have a conversation with my guest today, Karen Stiller. Karen is one of the senior editors of Faith Today magazine. She's written extensively for other publications such as Reader's Digest, Ekstasis, The Walrus, Christianity Today. The author of The Minister's Wife and co-author on some other books. But her newest book is called Holiness Here, Searching for God in the Ordinary Events of Everyday Life. And it's published by Nav Press. Welcome, Karen. Great to have you on the podcast today.
Thank you, Kevin. It's lovely to be here.
Yeah, so you're at home, I take it, in downtown Ottawa?
I am.
And I'm upstairs at the church I pastor in downtown Windsor. And so we're mutual downtown dwellers.
Good. I love me a downtown.
Yeah. I've really enjoyed digging into your book. You've helped us reclaim a dusty, misplaced treasure by the name of holiness. You've refreshed the adjective holy and the verb that holiness is, the action that it is. And just to give a bit of insight into what you're writing about in the book, do you have a working definition that you use for the word holy?
That is such a great question. Thank you, Kevin. And thank you for reading the book. And thank you for having me here. I really appreciate it. I've been looking forward to this conversation. A phrase that I use throughout the book is holy is and holy does. And I think that is my simplest working definition of what it means to be holy, maybe. So there is the probably deeply theological answer to your question that smarter people than I, people with way more letters behind their name should share. But we know as Christians that we are holy because of who God is and the gift that God has given us. So that is, the basic working definition for me of holiness. I spent a lot of time reading the book, Holiness, Its Nature, Hindrances, Difficulties, and Roots by J.C. Ryle, which was, to me, the starting point of the reading that I did. And he has this really simple line: holiness is the habit of being of one mind with God. And I really love that idea of seeking after the mind of God and trying to live in a way that reflects that yearning and search. So I think that's very much part of it. And I've been thinking about how we talk about being like Jesus. And I feel like we often equate that with holiness, of course, as we should, but it can feel impossible for a lot of us to think that we are being like Jesus or that is accessible to us. So in the book, I think I am trying to explore holiness as knowing that we are loved by Jesus, and then we can live in response to that. And that is the being and the doing of holiness. So you asked for a working definition. I probably gave you more than that, but that's where I'd land.
Yeah. I liked also in the book how you talked about it. Holiness in our life is not always linear. Rather than a straight line, it's more like a scribble.
Yeah.
Maybe you could even say it's like God's signature, right?
That's nice.
It comes through our life in spite of us.
I like that.
Yeah. I love the opening scene in chapter 1 where you're talking about this little park in your downtown neighborhood. And there was a preacher holding a service in the park. And, maybe you can unpack that story a little bit and just tell our listeners, about what you witnessed in your park.
Yeah. Well, I felt so fortunate to have come upon the scene, and I felt very fortunate to have had my writer's notebook with me, which I have many of them, but I carry notebooks in every bag and pocket, and or I use my phone. And I think later on, if we talk about writing a bit, I will expand on that. But just kind of witnessing what's in front of you. So what was in front of me in this like kind of rough park, like it's one corner of it has a playground with a fence encircling the playground, and that I always think, wow, good for you to the parents who take their kids to play in that playground. But it is, yeah, it's a rough part of town. It's a rough park. People, I'm sure, sleep there. Like it's a gathering place, which is, can be lovely too. Like it is fantastic to have this park and this gathering place. But, when people gather, all kinds of things can happen. So, yeah, it was a Sunday afternoon. I came upon this church service unfolding. The pastor was preaching, and it was a chaotic vibe. People were heckling him. One man in particular talked back to the pastor as he tried to preach, and I was like off to the side on a bench, taking notes, literally quietly, because it was so interesting to me. Because also, as the wife of a minister, church is hard for pastors actually, and to have someone heckling you when you're preaching, I was just amazed at this guy's ability to keep going. There was like a dog roaming around. There were a couple of women got in a fight about the dog. And then he shifted gears into communion. And I noted the differences between our church when we do communion. It's very tidy and liturgical and, ironed and beautiful. And here it was like just this passing of, the elements from one end of the group to the other. It was very casual. And the man who had been heckling, who was kind of sitting at the feet of the pastor, or had been, I was kind of watching his response to this communion being, sort of approaching him. And I thought he wouldn't take it because he was such a, negative Nelly, as my mother would say. But he did. And when he took, the little cup and the wafer, or however they were doing it, he just burst into tears. He started to cry. And then the pastor was there and was, basically holding this man as he wept. And I was just so touched by it. And I thought, this is like holy ground in this really rough place. And this is not church like I am accustomed to, but it is surely church that I'm seeing in front of me. So and then I started to feel like, oh, I'm taking notes, maybe I should go home. So yeah,
Well,
that is the opening scene.
yeah, and one of the realities of living in a downtown neighborhood is that you have daily witness to the density, the
Mm-hmm.
disparity, and the diversity of city life.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we talk about this whole notion of holy is and holy does, how does the environment of the city speak to you about holiness? I mean,
Yeah.
in your book, I read that you grew up in uh, a small community in Nova Scotia, and
Well, I grew up in the city, but it
oh, you
was a
did.
smaller city.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah. But my parents then moved to that smaller community. So yeah,
okay,
I grew up in
okay.
Dartmouth, Halifax. So let me answer that partly by giving you a behind the scenes update on something that just happened to me this weekend. I was at a conference here in Ottawa, and all of a sudden, this woman who I didn't know comes up to me with, towing this man, and she's like, "He's the pastor. This is the pastor from the park." And
Oh,
in your book. And I was, what? And he was, what? And the funny thing was, I after the book progressed along and I knew it was going to be a thing, like a couple of times it went through my mind, I bet I could find that pastor. Like I probably wouldn't be that hard, to ask keep asking questions, and who knows, a guy who hosts a thing, but I just didn't do that. Life took over. Anyway, so he was surprised to find me and learn learn that he was in my book. I think he had just learned that. Someone handed him a copy. So I got an update from him, which actually comes back to your question. And so basically everything kind of fell apart for him. Like he was like, the dog bit someone, the women actually did get in a fight. His partner in it fell back into an addictive lifestyle and is, no longer able to sort of partner with him right now. Or I don't want to quote him too much because I'm a little fuzzy on the details probably, but basically like it kind of didn't work out on the surface, this guy's ministry in this chaotic way. And the woman who was listening to us update each other said, but do you remember that week? Do you remember that week when the guy was heckling you? And he's like, look, that happened every week. So that was really, really beautiful, first of all, for me to meet this pastor. But it also goes to the messiness of life and ministry and, outreach in these kinds of settings in our cities. And my neighborhood, just I set the park up as a kind of study in contrasts in a way, right? It's good and it's bad. It's nice and it's not. And my neighborhood is both getting better and getting worse. Like I can see that when I go for walks. Like it feels rougher to me. There are more tents set up. Like people are having a more difficult time. I can see that. And then meanwhile, there's a nice family who just moved in across the road and is fixing their house up, and maybe house prices will rise. So there's this big stew of contrast. And so I believe that it's always hard work to do ministry, in these sorts of settings, and to be there for the long run, and to not become so discouraged. Like even as I talked to the pastor, I could still feel like his bouncy energy and his passion for his work, and he's going to get back at it. And so I think there's this certain calling for people who do that kind of work. And Kevin, I've probably strayed so far from your question. Can you remind me?
No, you're answering it very well. And I was intrigued in the update that, for the pastor, this was kind of the grist and grind of doing ministry the way he does, right?
Yeah.
So being heckled was not a new thing to him.
Right.
But and it's interesting because sometimes the holiness that happens in our life, we're not even always self-aware. We're just focused on doing the right thing, doing what we're supposed to be doing. And but you never know who's sitting on a park bench with a notepad, and you'll go down in infamy for giving communion to a heckler.
Yeah, that's so interesting because there's something in there that's quite beautiful, I think, about not knowing what's all that's happening around us, and not knowing the impact we're having on people, and not knowing how God can use our stories, which I find, like, as a writer and and a teller of other people's stories, like my journalistic writing has always been about telling stories like that. And there's such power and strength in being honest and transparent and vulnerable, and that's what I was seeing a lot in that day too. It's like, I don't think anyone here is pretending. I think people are being their fullest, truest selves at this moment. And and yet this sort of ramshackle community thing is happening, and God is clearly here. And so there's all kinds of stuff in there about how we are together, which I think is so important.
I was also interested to read that you had moderated the Religion and Society series at University of Toronto. a debate between leading atheists and
Mhm.
theologians, and that piqued my curiosity. I wonder how holiness can be at play in that environment, in apologetics and polemics. What can make those conversations holy, and what can make those conversations unholy?
Yeah. Oh, first of all, what a nightmare. Every time I did one of those things, I thought, how do I get myself into these situations? Because I always felt so out of my depth, and um, I would go, every time I was asked to do one, because I had it, they happened annually for a while there before COVID. I would go back to the organizer and say, "Are you sure? Are you sure?" Because what I needed them to understand was that I would have to be myself in those conversations, and ask the questions, and a lot of it would go over my head, and that I was sort of the stand-in for the listener. And so, and they were always like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." So I'm answering your very good question on the personal level first, because for me, that was kind of uh, a holiness thing, was doing something scary, to be part of something really good. And the really good thing was this creation of a conversation that would not happen otherwise, most likely.
Hmm.
Bringing together these people from maybe like really different worlds, but they share an interest in a topic, like whether it's, we did one on artificial intelligence. We did one, what is the meaning of life? That was a biggie with Jordan Peterson and William Lane Craig, um, for example. And so, to put people at the same table, so to speak, and bring a whole bunch of people in to listen, and then later, ask their questions and so on. I mean, it's a fantastic thing to do. And to grow in understanding, to be humble, like hopefully humility comes into that. And I did, it was interesting for me to be on the stage, literally like in the middle. Um, and I viewed myself as a host, not a moderator. Uh, and to just watch these people with interact and share and be willing to disagree well with one another, to disagree respectfully, but still learn from each other. And, I remember, what I know Jordan Peterson is like a controversial figure in some circles, but I remember really being struck by his empathy, when we were talking about the meaning of life. And he was talking about the suffering that people undergo, and I think, if memory serves, particularly that, um, it was really filled with university students, right, from University of Toronto and Wycliffe and so on. And he was moved to tears, like he was walking around the stage, like he reminded me of a preacher. And he was moving, he was so gifted at capturing the attention of the people. But he was very teary as he talked about the suffering of people. And it was just, I mean, it was amazing for me to watch that. And I think amazing for the people who were there. So just to have this experience of learning together, and then to have the people who come in particular have their minds changed a little bit. I think, you walk into an event like that, like maybe even dogmatic, or you're a fan of one but not the other, and so on, and you think you're going to be watching a fight, and
Hmm.
instead you're
Hmm.
watching this really amazing exchange of ideas. And then there's lots of back patting at the end, and exchanges of cell phones, and let's continue this conversation later, and let's go out for a beer. And yeah, it was cool, but I don't think I would ever do it again.
You made a nuanced distinction there between being a host and being a moderator.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I, I th I'm thinking that a host kind of springs out of hospitality, of uh, taking care of your guests, and maybe a moderator comes out of maybe like mediation, or being a one who is between, to allow for reconciliation. Uh,
Yes.
yeah, and so perhaps that role is ripe with opportunities for holiness. Maybe you
Oh,
should
I think
maybe you should
so.
go back and do it. I mean, now that you're
Well,
a self-professed expert on holiness.
right. Yes. Well, the thing is, what's interesting is that partly, and here's an example of how this gets all swirly and not straight liney, is that for me, it was partly my pride, in fact, that made me make sure they know I am hosting, I am not moderating, because
Mm,
I know what I don't know. I know that there's a lot I don't know. So even if I was in the middle of these brilliant, philosophers and theologians and scientists, and they, let's say they do go down some rabbit trail that has nothing to do with anything that is really being debated. And so a good moderator would say, we're going to bring you back, Charlie. Like, let's we'll save that one for another time. But I felt sometimes so out of my depth that I wouldn't know if they were off on a tangent. I literally wouldn't know. And so for me, like, part of that was like, yes, setting the beautiful table. And another part was like, I need to protect myself here. Like, this is, so it's like vanity, as opposed to humility. And so, but what I try to get at in the book is that, like, in that moment of realization of my true motivation, there is an opportunity to, like, okay, I see what I'm doing, I see what's happening here, and I can, if it's confessable, I can confess it. I can learn something about myself. I can think about who I am and who, God says I am and sees me as, and then just move a little further down that journey of holiness, which is roundabout. So yeah,
mhm.
there. That's my confession.
In the dedication of your book, you wrote, to our children, Eric, Holly, and Thomas, who helped us grow in holiness because of all the love.
Mm.
And you have grandchildren as well?
I do not.
Oh, you do
I
not.
do not.
Oh,
Yes, that
okay.
is not. I have not yet been thus blessed. Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, give me their emails, and I'll tell them, hey,
They'll know I'm
the
behind this.
greatest gift you can give to your mother.
Oh, it would be lovely. But
Yeah.
let me say that when I wrote that dedication, and I said, because of all the love, very much in purpose, because people, talk about sanctification, like they'll say, like, oh, marriage is, if you want to get sanctified, get married, or oh, kids. And the idea, sometimes implicit, and we're often joking, is that this is so hard. Because it's so hard, you will grow so much,
Mm,
because it's so hard. And what I tried to explore this in the book, but I asked the question, like, is the hard thing always the holy thing, and is the holy thing always the hard thing? And I don't. I mean, yes and no, because I think also we grow in holiness when we're loved so well, and when we have the opportunity to love so deeply. And for me, that's what parenting was.
mm,
um, it was just like, oh, these kids, like, they're amazing. And yes, it was hard, but I didn't grow just because it was hard. I grew because it was amazing. So yeah, that's the meaning behind that acknowledgement. And I assume that when grandkids come, I will, as so I hear, it's even more better, more better. It's even more lovely. It's because you can, that thing about giving them back. But even that is sort of a joke with a little edge, right? It's like, but I'm sure it's true. So yeah.
yeah. Yeah, grandchildren give you a whole new opportunity to love profoundly, um,
Beautiful.
and they are so responsive and so yeah. Anyways, we'll come back and have another conversation
Okay.
after you become Nana or Grandma or whatever the custom is.
I believe you. I believe you that it will be great.
Yeah. Hey, just after Christmas 2022, in January, your husband Brent passed away with lymphoma following a kidney transplant. In that one act of dying, you became a widow. Your kids, your children became orphans, even though they're adults. And being a widow and an orphan in this context does not imply destitution, but it does move you firmly into the cold arms of grief. Uh, the Quakers had a concept known as sanctified suffering. They referred to the way that God used suffering in our lives to make us holy or to purify us. I would say that suffering is a birthplace for deeper goodness. So talk to me a bit about holy grief. What's that look like for you? And are you seeing it played out in your kids as well?
Thank you, Kevin, for asking that question. And I've made a little note to myself to look up that the Quaker theology around that because I would find that really helpful to read probably. So when Brent was ill and we saw the direction in which we were going, my kids and I vowed together to take care of him to the end, that we would love him, into heaven, and that we would do it really well. And I mean, of course, we were going to do that, but it felt like a sacrament almost. Like it felt like we were doing essential holy work. And if he were here, he would say, "That's not a sacrament." Because he was an Anglican priest,
Yeah, yeah.
and these words matter. So when he died, I asked another thing of them and of myself, which was, we have to allow this to make us better and not bitter, and more beautiful and more awake to the sufferings of the world that are, is around us, and the grief of other people. And because that's what he did, because he had suffered loss in his life, and that's what he would want us to do, and it's what he would want for us, because bitter people are not happy people, and and they're cut themselves off from good things and love and all those things. So I believe that what you're saying is right, that God can help us, or it can use these things to grow good things in us. But I can testify that we are participants in that we have to find meaning, that there is a work to letting that happen. Because, a couple times, like, it's, as we record this, it's been, well, feels like yesterday, but just over a year, since Brent died in January 2023. And I have felt sometimes, like, not, I can't think of the right word for it, but an awareness that the way I was feeling at the moment was not more beautiful or better or kinder or more loving. That, oh, wow, like I am so angry right now, or I could run someone over with this grocery cart, or I could, roll up in a ball and not emerge for a really long time. And so that, which, that's grief. Um, and so I wish it happened automatically, that we were made better by hard things. But I think we definitely are participants in that, and we have decisions to make all the time. So I do believe that that we will continue the work of making meaning from this. And I have realized that people, there's such mystery to suffering. There's such mystery to horrible, hard things happening when you expect otherwise. Even if you didn't think you expected otherwise, all of a sudden something really horrible happens, and you're like, "Wow, I thought we were safer in the world than we really are." And picking up the pieces, and so yeah, help bring me back into line. Where do you want to go with this? Like because I have lots of thoughts about grief and how we help grieving people, and how we help widows in the church even. And my church community has been really beautiful and supportive, but church is very hard for me. And I know that, like Brent used to say, people cry in church all the time, and that it's safe and it's good to do that. And but there's also something, so, and I don't want to say that my grief is worse or harder, because that's not a thing, but church for the widow of the pastor is like torture. And that hasn't changed yet for me. Like I've it's probably gotten a little better, but when I go to this place that is, a place of worship and a place of coming together, and I think essential. I mean, I talk about church as essential in the book, really, and I believe that. But I just miss my husband so much when I'm there. So it's that is a hard thing that I keep pushing into and through, and I will, because it matters and I'm committed. But it's a challenge still.
Yeah, I'm not going to try to bring you back in line when when you're talking about something so important. But I was thinking too about when I was 30 years ago, when I was a youth pastor in another place. There was a man in the church that was just one of those upbeat, always encouraging, robust, say what's on his mind kind of guys. And his 18-year-old son got killed in a trucking accident. And I remember as I was a youth pastor, and so I was, probably 20 years younger than this guy, 15 to 20 years younger, probably 15 years younger. But watching him go through that, and the first thing he did was get angry and withdraw. And you'd see him about town, but he stopped coming to church, and every conversation was just anger at God. Why did? And I went out on a limb, and I invited him to come to a class I was teaching on Sunday mornings, and I said, "Ron, would you come and with the people in the group, just talk about what you're feeling and what you're going through, and don't come to give us answers. Just just come and you know, basically I was inviting him to make a confession, really, and to do it with people that cared about him. And so he did, and that helped him. He was able then to reconnect and start
lovely.
continue his journey with the people in the church and get past his anger with God and yeah. So I think it's we don't know a lot about how to grieve with those who grieve, but you gave some good insights in the book, and I appreciated that. And
thank you.
Yeah, holiness changes us. God's nature, God's character, and us saying, I'll replicate. I'll accept that as how I'm to be. On page 31 in the book, you had a great paragraph I loved here about self-control. Self-control is not just about what we do not do. Self-control is about what we freely and willingly do as we turn toward that other fruit and say, yes, please. Self-control can look like saying yes to participating in holiness and seeking where it will take us, like the greatest adventure of soul and soil. What would it feel like to think about self-control as something that can help us not hurt others and not hurt ourselves? That's brilliant. I don't think I've ever heard self-control framed in that way. And it made me think about, so many people I know that are dealing with recovery, overcoming trauma, people struggling with mental health. And the one thing that's common to all of those things is how it erodes a person's self-control, and impulse control becomes a big issue. And how do we help somebody who's buried in addiction, trauma, mental illness, and help them to make those steps into living a holy life? Can we make decisions that move us into holiness, or is it always God moving on us to direct us into a holy way?
Yeah. So my first answer is I don't know. And I'm not sort of qualified to speak about how to help someone who is in the, so I will say that. But I do think, starting with the final thing you said about, do we make decisions that move us in a direction, or is it, God moving us? And that too is mysterious. And I wouldn't know exactly where God's intention ends and our will begins, but I do, a big thread that I think is in the book is that we do have agency. We have work to do. We have the ability to participate in our own transformation. And that doesn't mean we are, the creators of our transformation, if I can put it that way. But it means that we are, and we already know this because we know we have to say yes. Like we believe right from the very beginning of our Christian journey that we have a role to play, and it's just say yes. Like we're very clear that it's grace, and it is, but we still have to do something. We have to open our arms. We have to say yes, and then from there, we also I talked about it in the Fruit of the Spirit chapter, which is where you're quoting from, I think, where
Yep.
I don't think that, and in my experience, there are some stories of like dramatic overnight, you know, transformation. I know that. But for most of us, ordinary wrecks, it's a long haul. And so the fruit of the Spirit, I think I did think at some point that, oh, it just like descends onto you. Like because you have the Holy Spirit dwelling within you, you are more peaceful, joyful, et cetera, full of self control. Well, I didn't have to live too many years in the faith to see that. Actually, I didn't become,
Yeah.
you know, a paragon of virtue or, so patient and so self controlled. So we do have a role to play. And, as I, read my way through this work, and, this isn't obviously, I'm not saying anything new. Lots of writers, like this is a long conversation about holiness and growth and how we grow as Christians. That's like not really what the book is about, but it is also is what the book is about a little bit. Can we change? Do we change? How do we change? We all want to change. And so I think that desire is in all of us. And, we want to know our faith has made a difference in the world, but also in our little world, in the world of ourselves. We want to know that we are growing closer to God and loving better than we did before and living better than we did before. But I, like you, I'm sure in your years in church ministry and just being in the world, you've seen people do things that you never would have thought they would have done.
Yeah.
And like, what?
Yeah.
That happened?
And disappointed myself more often than being disappointed in the failure of others.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. Like it's amazing what we're capable of. And it's amazing how much more we're capable of it when we don't think we are. So this, and I talk about humility in the book, and part of humility is like knowing that we are capable of anything, but we're also capable of everything, on the positive side. And
Right.
so,
Right.
that is true of anyone in any condition. And so those beautiful stories of, like, to circle back to like addiction as an example, those beautiful stories of rehabilitation and the remaking of a life, and what God can do and what community can do that comes around someone struggling with this stuff. And I mean, those stories are incredible and so inspiring to all of us. And so I really, I so admire people. I have friends here in Ottawa who work in the trenches, so to speak. And it's beautiful to see. So we need to hear more of those stories.
Agreed. Yeah, I think the Jesus talks about the kingdom of God. There's often this seed analogy, right?
Mm-hmm.
That it's like a seed, and the Holy Spirit gives us all the seeds for the fruit. And
yeah, that's a good way of saying it.
But it has to be planted and planted in season, right? You don't just plant it once. You're always planting the seed of patience, and the fruit grows, and then you get more seed, and you got to plant that again, and while you enjoy the fruit, and I think too, part of humility is the fact that we're able to enjoy being holy, right?
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
I love
I
that.
picked up on that theme in your book too. Was just this idea that getting comfortable with saying I am holy, and not doing it, ironically, but actually no. God has adopted me. God is forming Christ in me. I am becoming holy.
Yeah,
That's
I know. Even look, I wrote the book and it's making me laugh
yeah.
and giggle. No, I know. We're so, we make it so much more complicated than it needs to be. And we think it's only about other people. And, you know, that, for me, this is a bit of an old thing. Maybe it's not still a thing, but people, think that Christians think they have it all together. Or they think, well, I can't do that. I can't be good like that. If only you knew the real me, et cetera, et
Mhm.
cetera. Like, you still hear that. And it's such a misunderstanding of and that makes it sound like it's that person's fault. And I don't mean that, but it's like we've misrepresented what holiness looks like, or we just have the wrong idea about it. We think it means, behaving incredibly properly and not having any fun.
Right,
So I would hope to push against that a little bit,
right,
which
right.
I think is what you were saying too.
Yeah. Have you heard of Bishop Mari Emanuel?
I have not.
He's a bit of an outlier. He grew up in Iraq as a Chaldean Christian and ended up becoming an Assyrian Orthodox priest. Subsequently, the body that ordained him removed him for some of his controversial views,
Mm.
I believe. And anyways, he is in Australia and he has an independent Orthodox church. It sounds like an oxymoron there.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Wow.
But anyways, he shows up in the algorithm on my YouTube feed, and so I've checked in on him a couple times just to hear what kind of things he's saying. And anyways, not that long ago, while he was he streams his services. And while he was doing one of his church services, a 16-year-old Muslim youth walked up to the front and proceeded to start stabbing him.
Mm.
And of course, they stopped the feed, and he was taken to the hospital, and the youth was arrested. But on the other side of that, a few weeks later, I was struck by just sort of that post-trauma things that he came back to his place of ministry and said. And the first thing that was profound was just the deep forgiveness that he held
Mm.
towards his attacker. And
Mm.
he said, "I forgive. I will. I am a father to you." And I guess in
Mm.
a Orthodox context, that must bear some weight. But I am a father to you, and I forgive you, and I forgive those who sent you. And that was really profound. And the second thing was that during the attack, he got stabbed in one of his eyes and lost his eye.
Mm.
And so
Oh
he's
gosh.
wearing an eye patch now.
Mm.
And as he was making comments, he said, "And I offer my eye as
Mm.
a sacrifice to Jesus, in whose name I have been persecuted." And then he just in humility, just talks about how it's really such a small gift compared to what the Lord Jesus gave.
Mm. Mm.
And and in uh 70 countries of the world, there's a high level of persecution against Christians. I think the current number with Open Doors is at around 365 million Christians that are enduring some form of persecution. including attacks, including death, including imprisonments, and just a whole lot of mistreatment. So then I think about how easy we have it as Canadians. And do you think that we're maybe in the beginner class when it comes to understanding holiness compared to other places in the world? I think you've traveled a bit around the world too, in a few countries.
Mhm.
What have
Yeah,
you
I have.
seen? What have you seen about the practice of holiness? Are we a whole lot different from our brothers and sisters in other countries, or are we a whole lot the same? What are we?
I don't know. As you were telling the story of the bishop, I was thinking, yeah, that's a lot worse than being heckled in a park. It's That's a whole other level, and yet, and yet, I would say that again, I don't think I'm I'm making stuff up here officially. I don't
That's what
think
writers do.
I don't think that deeply don't think that we only grow in holiness through horrible bad things.
Right.
I really don't think that. And yet, as someone who I have suffered greatly in the last year and a bit through
Mhm.
my grief of the unexpected loss of my husband,
Yeah.
and and I do feel like, well, I know it has changed me, and I don't know the extent of those changes yet. And so I hope they're going to be for the better, or maybe that's not the way to think about it, like good change, bad change. It's just a new way of being because of this thing that this big thing that is the new reality. So our brothers and sisters around the world live in these conditions in which that things can press in on them, and there's such difficult places, but there's also wonderful, beautiful things there too, right?
Mhm.
um, that also help them grow in holiness. So I just don't know, but I think it's really important that we hear from our brothers and sisters in the majority world. Like, that's where the majority of our, the Christian brethren live now. We know that those are the places where the church is growing. And so I would say that I would rather, instead of the good question you asked, I would rather think about how can we learn from voices that we don't hear enough, that have been shaped by things that we might not live through. And so how do we have this opportunity to learn from each other. And I would love to lean into that more. And and that, what does that mean? That means, like, you do it. You watch this YouTube feed of this bishop, and you are learning from him. And you don't need, well, I'm really going on a limb here. You don't need to have your eye gouged out to
Right.
learn from what he had to go through.
Right.
Um, but so we honor our suffering when we listen to each other, and when we learn from each other, and their holiness can inspire us in our own. Like, we know when we hear stories, like when I have traveled, and I've done, like, I don't know, it felt like rough travel to me. Like, we were in refugee camps in South Sudan and Uganda, and we've also traveled, our family. We've taken our kids to, off the path places, and it always changes you, at least for a few weeks. When you
Yeah.
get back, like,
Yeah.
you always vow to live slightly different because of it. And so how much more so can we be changed by hearing, people's journey of holiness and circumstances that we would presume to be like pressure cookers, um, for that kind of growth. But I do think that, again, like the anguish that I have tasted in the last year and a bit, I can't discount that as a road to growth. And so, and it amazes me, the stories, like once you start to talk about grief, the fellowship of grief opens up to you, and you realize there's so much going on in people's lives here that we know nothing about, and that we just can't imagine what people have lived through. So I'm not at all trying to minimize the persecution of Christians
No,
around the world.
I don't hear that at all.
Okay.
I think that it kind of makes me think about the ancient practice of sainthood, right? That there are exceptional demonstrations of a disciple, a life laid down, a disciplined follower who picks up their cross and does it with grace and even humor, But at the same time, there's the polarity, right, of sainthood versus common experience, and holiness covers it all. It's our common experience. It's where we live, and the thoughts that get stuck in our head, and the patterns that we establish. That's where God goes to work, and we don't live in fear of the sword and being attacked, but at the same time, we would rise to the occasion if the Spirit is in us.
Yeah, I think we would. I like that you said that. I think we are, just as, like, well, we said this before, just as we're capable of doing anything bad, we're also capable of doing anything good. And I think that's worth remembering.
Yeah. I got one last question, and it could very easily probably fill a whole other episode.
I will not go on. I will not go on and on.
No, because I'm going to talk about the gift that resides in you, the inclination that you have, the burden that you have, the joy that you have in being a writer. So talk to me a bit about the art and the discipline of writing. When did you know that you were a writer, and when did you settle into it? And how does the act of creating vacillate between, say, being a sacred joy versus a perfunctory job?
Wow. You do ask good questions. Yeah. So I realized I was a writer after I became a writer. So we were living in northern Saskatchewan, in Brent's first, parish posting. And I made a determined effort to become a writer. So I grew up, I'm very, stereotypically nerdy kid, reading after book, like going to the bookmobile that came on our road that was like a thrill. I can still smell the books in that bus. So yeah, I've always been a reader. I don't think I dreamt of being a writer, but I probably realized I had some natural skill maybe, and I had opportunity. So there was this little newspaper in the town, and I thought, you know what, it's small enough that it doesn't scare me, and so I went in and talked to the editor and pitched a column called Faith Matters. I think probably the name of every religious column in North America, probably. But anyway, that was my name. And and they let me do that. So I started writing there, and pushed it out. I kept pushing it out over the years, trying to make a living from home, basically. And the practice of my craft, like writing is like lots of things. The more you do it, the better you get, hopefully. So I was very intentional about taking classes, about reading books about writing. We moved to Toronto, and Tyndale had a university, college and seminary now had a 1-year communication certificate at that time that I took. And that really launched me, mostly because of the instructors. It was like cohort learning, and the instructors were from different places. And I was just really encouraged, and, picked up freelance gigs from that program. And that set me down the path of eventually working at Faith Today, and so on and so forth. And then I did a Master of Fine Art and Creative Nonfiction, and I graduated in 2018. And that's how my first book was written, The Minister's Wife. It came out of that master's program, and that really transformed my writing into what I would, coming back to your question, view as, a vocation and a calling and an opportunity, and what God has maybe inviting me to do because of how he made me. And I feel, but, I was going to say, but it's not, but it's, and I've worked really hard. And I really wanted it. I had a burning, fire in my belly. And I remember standing on the front lawn of our rectory in Meadow Lake, Saskatchewan. And I said to Brent, my ideal life would be like to have an editor actually just call me and give me a story to write, be assigned a story from an editor. And, that was my dream. And that ended up happening. And, being a mom, I've talked about this before, being a mother, and I'm not saying this happens for everybody who stays home with their kids, but for me, it gave me it's like, okay, I have 2 hours, right. I got good at being fast, going deep quickly, et cetera, et cetera. So, and I think that the storytellers of the church have a really important role. And that's what you're doing with this podcast and probably other work you do. So when we tell our true stories well, and when we, are willing to turn the lights on in the room, it really helps other people. It helps us, and it helps other people. And that has always been my experience. And as a pastor's wife, I saw especially the power of that, because I quickly saw that people, and this is, I think, my interest in holiness goes back a long ways, because I realized people think we're really holy. Uh-oh.
Yeah.
And then when I would reveal my true questions, or, share like a struggle or a doubt or whatever, I don't know the answer to that. I saw the impact of that, but it didn't turn people off. Actually, it opened them up. Oh, wow.
It's an invitation into holiness, to be transparent and humble, because I mean, there are people who are transparent, but you wish they'd close the curtains, because there's a whole lot of other things going on that are not godly, but godly sorrow, godly questions, godly doubts.
And I think for me, the process, like spiritual reading, has been very important to me. Reading a wide range of authors, grappling with things, and that has played a big part in my spiritual life. And I love that, and to write in the way that I am now writing most often, which is that soul excavation, like, reading. And then, okay, what do I think? And believing that, I mean, who am I to write a book about holiness? Like, you wouldn't believe the looks I got. And the comments, even from people who love me. It was like,
Yeah.
you're writing a book about holiness? Because it seemed like that's for other people. That's for, smarter, bigger people who, like, that's for theologians. That's for, old guys and whatever. And I was like, I didn't even really question it. It's like, I'm curious about this. I have a question and I want to explore some answers. And that's, for me, what writing is also about. It's starting with a question, not thinking you have all the answers. And you may have done this too. I had the privilege of interviewing Philip Yancey a couple times, and he's very much like that. Like, he says, it's like I'm walking through a forest or a jungle or something. I have a machete and I'm cutting my way through with all my questions and what I'm exploring. And then I finally get through and I'm on the beach and I turn back and there's a whole bunch of people following me who have the same question. And I just loved that. And I'm not comparing myself to Philip Yancey. But I'm talking about the writing life and the life of asking questions and being willing to take some risks in that. And I thought that was a beautiful image.
Who did God use in your life to say, yes, you are a writer, you have permission?
My father-in-law, who I still have the first laptop he bought me when we lived in Meadow Lake. And Brent and I had one computer, and Brent's office was in our basement. And my father-in-law, I probably said something. I don't know what. He discovered this interest of mine, and he showed up with a laptop for me, which was like, I'm holding my hands up, and it was like a foot high. That's what it feels like.
Was that one of those lunchbox computers?
It was big and heavy.
Pentium
And
286. Yeah.
floppy disks and so on. But to me, that was like huge. That was, I see you, I believe in you. Here's a tool. And so that was a turning point for me. And Brent, my husband, he absolutely was a husband who, set me free. Go, be, I'm here. I'm your biggest fan. He always said that I'm her biggest fan. I'm her biggest fan. Yeah. And he truly, when I got a call from, a charity inviting me to go to South Sudan, and I had like 2 weeks to decide, and I called him. I was like, I don't think I should do this. Like, it was felt scary, And he was like, of course you should do that. Of course you should do that. And I was, oh, okay. And I did it. And it was amazing. So he really did that for me. So that's beautiful.
I think holiness makes you fearless.
That's neat. I don't think it's made me fearless yet, but I think, what? I think it makes you able to do things even though you're fearful.
Right.
Can we put it that way?
Yeah. It opens the purse so you can reach in and take some courage.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. Hey, this has been really fun talking with you, Karen. And
I have loved every minute of it, Kevin.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I know that God's doing some of his finest work in your life at this difficult stage. And you don't yet know the fruit of it, but the love that you have for your Lord and the love that he has for you, I think that's enough. I think you'll get through. I think you'll be all right.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah. Well, until we have a chance to meet again, I say farewell.
Thank you.
Well, it was great getting to have that conversation with Karen Stiller, and I would encourage you to go out and order her book, Holiness Here. In the after conversation, once we had finished our interview, Karen and I talked on for a few more minutes, and she put me in touch with John Longhurst. John is the religious editor for the Winnipeg Free Press, one of the few Canadian papers that still has a religious section. And I'm going to be interviewing John on the next episode about some things that he's written, about his decades of work as a religious columnist in the Winnipeg Free Press, and just a very interesting guy. He ended up interviewing me for an article coming out on the podcast that'll be in Faith Today at some point. And we're scratching each other's back. I'm going to be having a conversation with John Longhurst from Winnipeg. So come back on our next episode, will you? Until that time, I'm your host, Kevin Rogers, and you've been listening to Sidewalk, Skyline podcast.